Welcome to this session about building customer engagement applications with a bunch of technologies that we will investigate together. But you know that before I start, I have to show you this slide, which is about the fact that if you're buying something, you should do it based on currently available features in the product. And I'm sure you have heard that before. My name is Christoph Conrads. I'm a developer evangelist with Salesforce. I'm based in Boston. This is my Twitter handle. If you're interested in this topic and the products that we will cover today, please follow me, and I try to tweet and blog about these different technologies. How many people were in the keynote this morning? The developer keynote, I should say. Okay. Remember that they spoke about a reference architecture, or Heroku DX, which was about really providing patterns to help you build customer engagement applications. And as part of these patterns, we actually built an application. And that application is called Nibs. And I helped with the development of that application. And so in this session, what I will do is really take you through all the steps and the process of building an application like this one. So just to introduce the concept, and then I'll demonstrate the application in a moment, but Nibs is a customer engagement application for specialty chocolate retailers. So imagine maybe that chain of fancy chocolate stores, and they want to engage with their customers in a social way, let them share their favorite products on social networks, understand how they use the product, what product they like, and maybe have, one-to-one interactions with these customers, that kind of thing. Okay, I'll show that to you. In a second. You can replace chocolates, of course, with any product. And most companies these days have some kind of customer engagement applications. And sometimes it's through their main application. Think about your favorite airline, your favorite hotel, things like that. So this application is built on Force.com. It's deployed on Heroku. And it's also using ExactTarget. So this is really a good application that brings together the different pieces of the platform. And we'll talk about that today. So I have about 5 slides that I want to quickly cover with you before we dive into the demo and the code. So when we thought about building that application, we consider different options, and we could have built a native application. And in that case, that would have meant that we would have had to build an application, actually 3 applications, because we really wanted to target these 3 platforms: Android, iOS, and Windows Phone. So we considered building a native application for each platform, but we decided instead to use the web stack. And so this application is built with HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. But obviously, we wanted that application to be deployable through the app stores. So what we did was to package that application as a hybrid app. And typically, you do that these days using Apache Cordova. And Apache Cordova is simply, it's actually 2 things. It's a wrapper around a web app. It's a kind of a thin native application, lightweight native application that simply wraps a web app so that you can deploy it on the different app stores. Because last time I checked, if you submit index.html to the Apple App Store, they are not going to take that. So you need to somehow wrap your application into a native shell. And that's really what Apache Cordova does, or what a hybrid application does. But in addition to that, and that's important when you want to engage with your customers, A hybrid application also gives you access to all the native features of your device. So you can use the camera, you can use geolocation, you can access a local database, you can access your contacts, and these are all features that may come handy when building a customer engagement application like that. So with that kind of architecture, you build the application once using the web stack, and you can deploy it to the different app stores, and in fact, even more platforms than what you see on the screen there. So it's about building a web app, and this is your traditional sitemap. This may be the way you've been building web applications until today, with the Salesforce platform or other technologies like PHP, Ruby on Rails, JSP, and things like that. And the key thing about the key characteristic of that approach is that you build these little pages. Every box on my slide here in that sitemap is essentially a page, and behind that page there is a piece of Apex code or PHP code or whatever. And at the server side, the server will execute that code and send you an HTML page, right? That's essentially, at a super high level, the way it works. Now, could you still use that approach when you build a mobile application? Can you ask the server to essentially generate the UI for you using Visual Force pages, PHP, or whatever? Could you do it? Yes. Should you do it? What do you think? Is it a good idea in a mobile application to let the server generate the whole thing, the UI, for you? If you did that, and it's feasible, you can do it, but you would lose one thing that's really important in a mobile application, and that's the ability to work offline, right? I think that mobile users have the expectation that the application is at least going to do something when you're offline, okay? So that wouldn't work. If you rely on a server to generate the UI, obviously, when you're offline, the server is not available, so you basically have nothing. So we are not doing it this way, but we are doing it this way. And this is a kind of a new pattern for developing these applications that we call single-page application. And essentially, the basic idea is that instead of asking the server to generate the UI for you, the UI is going to be generated entirely at the client side. Okay? So you basically start with this. That's the only HTML page that you have in your application. It's essentially an empty page, okay? And using JavaScript, you're going to generate the HTML on the fly. When the user asks for one view, you will build that view. You will build the HTML tags in JavaScript, and then when the user wants to navigate to another view, you will generate that other view on the fly. So that sounds great. This is what we call single-page application or single-page architecture. Now, this sounds great, but it's fairly complex. And in the same way you have frameworks at the server side to generate HTML, starting with Visual Force pages or Ruby on Rails or PHP, you may want to consider frameworks at the client side, because it's not really trivial to build a large application entirely in JavaScript, and specifically all the pages. You may have an application with hundreds of pages at the client side. So you will need some kind of a structure, a way to organize your code, maybe an MVC type of architecture. And there are many, many, many frameworks that are there to help you. And we don't have time to cover every single one of them, but let me introduce you to one way to look at them. There are really two categories of framework. On the left, what we call full stack. Essentially, they try to solve all the problems that you may face when building a single-page application, including DOM manipulation, architecture, which is really providing you with your basic MVC type of architecture, and also the UI. They give you UI components that look a certain way. And in that category, you'll see Sencha Touch, jQuery Mobile. So these are typically the frameworks that you find in the full stack category. And on the right, it's another approach. It's kind of, build your own stack. You pick what you want. Maybe for DOM manipulation, you want jQuery. For MVC architecture, you may decide to choose Backbone, Angular, Knockout. And for the UI, you may decide to use Bootstrap, Ionic, Topcode, or others. Now, the benefit of that approach on the right is that, you can really choose at every level, on each layer, your favorite framework. And if at some point you don't like that framework anymore, it should be pretty easy to unplug that framework and plug another one. Like, for instance, if you think that Bootstrap may not be ideal for a mobile application, you can say, OK, I'm taking that out, and I'm going to use another framework, another UI framework on top of Backbone, for instance. OK? So you have more flexibility, because on the left, if you don't like the UI components of jQuery Mobile, it's really hard to say, now I'm going to use Bootstrap on top of jQuery Mobile. Good luck with that. That's not really going to be easy, and that's, you should probably not do that. So after looking at all the options, what we decided to do in that application was to use AngularJS, so to go on the right side of my slide there, and use AngularJS as the MVC framework. Okay? And AngularJS is really emerging as almost like the de facto standard for providing structure in a client application for building, single-page applications. And it has some really cool features, including dependency injection, data binding, two-way binding, things like that are really, really cool. It's supported and built by Google these days. It's really nice. It organizes the code, and we'll look at some code in a minute. It organizes the code in services, views, and controllers, and we'll speak about that in a second. And on top of that, because as I mentioned before, Angular doesn't really care too much about the UI layer. You don't have mobile components out of the box, for instance. So on top of that, we decided to use the Ionic framework. And if you didn't meet these guys, they're on the floor here. They have a booth. And Ionic is a really, really polished UI framework specifically for mobile applications. So they have really good components out of the box. Including cards, lists, and it's not only the UI components themselves, but it's also mobile patterns. Like, for instance, on iOS, what happens when you slide a list item? It's going to reveal buttons to potentially delete the list item and maybe do something else. Okay, so this goes beyond just giving you a nice skin, giving you a nice CSS if you want. It's really about implementing the basic mobile patterns, UI patterns that you see in these applications, like the side menu that slides in and out and things like that. All that is built in using optimized, hardware-accelerated approaches to solve these problems. So that is what we decided to use. And so this is my last slide. And this really gives you the full picture of the application that we will be looking at here. So in the middle, we have that consumer app. It's built on top of Node.js. That really doesn't matter too much. If you're familiar with another server-side language, by all means, use that. But Node.js certainly has benefits. It's fairly simple. It gives you, in fact, the same language at the server side and at the client side, which is kind of nice. And in that Node.js application, we have access to tables. We actually use a Postgres database, as you see there. and to push like offers to that consumer app or products or things like that, we have tables in the Postgres database like product, campaign, contact, and things like that. But these tables are actually populated from Salesforce. So in other words, the marketing people, they use Salesforce. They create campaigns in the campaign object in Salesforce. They create products in the product object in Salesforce. And what we use here is a product that you may have heard of called Heroku Connect to actually keep the data in sync between Salesforce and that Postgres database, which means that you as the developer of that node application, you don't make REST API calls to Salesforce, you make SQL calls against that local database. All right, make sense? All right, so we'll take a look at that in a second, but just to finish the big picture, at the bottom there, we realize that if you speak about engagement, the application has to understand who you are, engage with you, depending on who you are, what you do, maybe tweak the experience, provide you with customized offers and campaigns. And for that, we decided to use ExactTarget, and specifically, we use two components in ExactTarget, Journey Builder, which I will describe in a second, and then Mobile Push, because a campaign can be delivered, if you want, in a mobile application through a real-time push notification, which has become a kind of a standard way of interacting in a mobile application. And that's really the application that we will look at. So with that, I'm going to leave my slides behind, and I'm going to try to quickly stream my screen here. Mirroring. OK, there it is. OK, I'm going to move that here. And here we are. OK, so what you see on the left is not an emulator. It's actually my screen here on my iPhone that I'm streaming right there on the screen. So the first thing that I'm going to do here is log in. I could sign up, but I'm already defined as a user. So all these interactions that you see here, they are essentially provided by Ionic. I didn't have to come up with my own code or own CSS to do that. We wanted social integration, and that includes social login. So in this case, I'm going to try here to log in with Facebook. And so I just logged in with Facebook. And one thing that I want to show you right away is that a user in the consumer app is actually a contact, becomes a contact in Salesforce. So even if you sign up from the consumer app, we will push you as a contact into Salesforce. And how will we do that? Again, using Heroku Connect. So we will create a row, if you want, in the contacts table in Postgres, and automatically that row will be pushed to Salesforce and will become an instance, if you want, of the contact object. So let me show you how that works. So for instance, I'm on contacts here in my Salesforce instance. And you see that this is me. It actually pulled my picture, my profile picture from Facebook. So we have that integration here. It knows who I am. It knows a little bit about me, whatever is available in Facebook publicly, like my Facebook ID, my picture, and maybe a little more. And all that information will be helpful to really engage with me at a deeper level. OK, so at this point, I can go here. So this is my profile. I can do a number of things here. I can say, OK, maybe these are my preferences. I like milk chocolates, and I need a large T-shirt, and I can save that. And here we go. All right, so that's the basic kind of sign up and login in the application if you want. So let's do something different. I will open the menu here, and there are specials. And specials are essentially offers or campaigns if you want. So me do this, and you see here that I have a number of offers. All these cards, again, the UI of this, I really didn't have to work hard because all that is provided by, the Ionic framework. So let me maybe take this one. Okay, so that's an offer in the app, and I wanted to show you right away that this, again, is coming from the campaign object in Salesforce, and here I am. So again, as the marketing person, I will create campaigns here. I will upload a picture. I will really define the campaign, and that will go straight in the campaign object, which is going to be synchronized with the campaign table in Postgres. Okay, so there are a couple of things that I can do here. I can share this on social media. And like, for instance, let me show you this. If I share on Facebook, and let me get out of the application right away, because that's more interesting. So I just shared that product on Facebook, and look what happened. I get a notification, because we use push notification so that you can, engage socially, maybe with your friends. We want your friends to know that you actually liked this product or this offer. Okay, and so this is an example of using ExactTarget Mobile Push, the SDK, and I'll show you the code in a second, to actually kind of, let your friends know and create that sort of interaction with you. And you could do the same with, Google Plus or Twitter, so I could share that on Twitter as well. And notice what happens here is that as I start interacting, to create that engagement, we want to give you an incentive. You actually earn points when you engage socially with our products. And when you reach a certain number of points, we reward you. So your level, you're not silver anymore. You're just promoted to gold. Now, of course, because it's chocolate, we found some fancy names to describe that. It's not silver, gold, and platinum. It's whatever it is, Trinitario, whatever that means. I don't know. I'm not a huge connoisseur, but there you go. And you see that the branding, actually, of the application changed here from green initially to that new color. Okay, so a couple of things that I can do here. I could actually redeem the offer. You see that when I redeem the offer, we generate a barcode that you could present at the counter when you check out, or you can save this to your wallet so that maybe all the offers that you're interested in, let me actually save this one too, will end up here in your wallet for later use. Okay, and so now it's almost like the passbook. You can keep all these QR codes in there, and when you check out, you can use them at that point. All right, very similarly, we have products. So let me show you the products. So these are some of the products here. I'm going to take that one. You can do the same type of things. So for instance, you can share on Facebook, on Google+. And in this case, you can also add to your wish list. And you see that at this point, we are very generous. We upgrade you very quickly. You can obviously tweak that a little bit. And if I keep adding products to my wish lists, and then I go back to the menu and look at my wish list again, you'll see that I have a wish list with all the products that I'm interested in. So again, you guessed it, this comes straight in Salesforce from the product object. So you create, the marketing person would create all these products here, update the picture, description, and everything so that it's pushed automatically to the consumer app. So another thing that I wanted to show you very quickly is that we keep track of the activity. And again, this is a nice list. The UI is, I didn't have to do much here to get a nice UI. So we keep track of the activity because that tells us a lot about engagement, right? That we know what you like, and we can take actions based on that. And so for that, we actually created a custom object in Salesforce to keep track of all the interactions of all the users. Now, that may rapidly become, a big data problem, because you can imagine that I would have a lot of interaction, but that's a good problem to have, because that means I have a lot of information about my customers, and I can really engage with them in a meaningful way. Again, we create a row in an interaction table in Postgres, and that gets synchronized automatically with Salesforce in that custom object. Okay, so let me actually demystify that piece a little bit, since I've been talking about it for a while. Okay, so I'm going to show you how that piece, so the synchronization piece, is actually working. So this is my Heroku dashboard with all the apps that I have there. And this one is actually called Nibs 2. You see that in that app, I have, at this point, 2 plugins. One is the Postgres database, because I needed to keep track of my local tables. And the other one here is the Heroku Connect plugin. Okay, so I'm going to select that one so I can show you the configuration of Heroku Connect here. Okay, so it's initializing everything. You'll notice that it's really nice in terms of giving you information about how this is being used, the number of data sync that happen over time and things like that. So let me quickly show you how you would configure that synchronization between Salesforce and a Postgres database. So these are the objects that my application is actually using. I'm using campaign, contact, a couple of custom objects, including interaction that I just talked about before, and then the product object and a store object. If I needed another object in my application, I would simply click Add here. And so these are all my objects in Salesforce, standard objects or custom object, and I would select it here. So imagine, for instance, that I need account. I will simply go ahead, and at this point, I have nothing else to do. It's going to create the account table in my local Postgres database, and it's going to synchronize the fields that I select here. So I can go ahead and say, okay, well, I don't want all the fields. These are really the only fields that I need. Okay? And I'll do that and continue. And very important point, that synchronization can be read-only. In other words, it will take the data from Salesforce and replicate the data in Postgres, or it can be bidirectional. In other words, if I create a row in Postgres, it will make its way back to Salesforce. So I'll say read-only here, and here we go. We have a new object that's going to be synchronized, or at least it should be. Okay. All right, so I may have to take the ID or something like that, so I'll skip over that right now. But so these are the objects that have already been defined, and you see that the mappings are defined this way. You can change that. You can change the fields, and if I added a field or remove the field, it would add or remove a column in your Postgres database. Okay. So that's essentially the idea of the synchronization between Salesforce and Postgres. Again, as the developer of the consumer app, you really go with SQL against that local database. All right. Okay, so maybe I think it's time to show you some code and show you how these pieces all fit together. All right. So I'm going to bring up my editor here. How many people have played with Angular before? Oh, that's really good. How many people have played with Ionic? A little less. Okay, so that helps me focus. So I'm going to show you, what I'm showing you here, let me try to make that a little bigger. Here we go. is like, first I will start with the Angular structure, because this can become a fairly large app. It's important to build everything into modules. Otherwise, things will get out of control pretty quickly. So for instance, this is my product module. And as you can see here, I have a campaign or an offer module. Basically, for each feature in my application, I will define a module. And each module is self-contained. That's certainly a best practice for building applications like this. And you typically start with what we call the routes of your application. Okay? And what is a route? It's simply a state, if you want, in your application. Because remember, what's the only page that you really have statically inside your app? There is only one. It's called index.html, and it's totally empty. So you need a way to tell your app, well, you know, go into that state. It's kind of a virtual state because you don't really have a product page, you know, product.html. You're going to create it on the fly. So you say, here, you basically define, that's what I do here, that if the URL is basically, you know, your domain / products, you need to create the list of products, right? That's what the user will expect. And how are you going to do that? You're going to create two things. You need to map two things. You will need a controller that I call here product list controller. The controller is going to be responsible essentially to get the data, okay, and prepare the view. And the template is essentially responsible for defining what that list will look like, so for creating the UI. So that's essentially how you build a single-page application. You define a state or a route, and then you say, well, for that route, the controller is going to be responsible for retrieving the data, and the template is going to be responsible for displaying the data. And then you specify additional states. So here is another state, product / some product ID. Now, we understand that at this point, we want to display the details of a product. And to do that, I will use a different controller called product detail controller and a different template, of course, product detail.html. So you see that to actually create a state, it's always the same thing. You need a controller to get the data. You need a template to actually build or represent the UI. Okay? So let's look at that controller. Maybe let's start with product list controller. Because I told you that this module was self-contained, guess what? It's right here in the same file. So here is my controller. Okay? Now, my controller is calling a service called product. And that service was actually defined here. It is an HTTP service that's making a call to the /product endpoint in my Node application. So you see that using Angular HTTP, it's really a piece of cake to execute a REST call. It's like 2-3 lines of code here. So you specify, hey, it's going to have an all method, and it's going to have a get method to get a specific product, and make calls to either /products in Node or /product ID in Node, depending on whether you call all or get. So for the product list, obviously I call product all, and then look what I do. The result that comes back from that HTTP, from that REST request, I store it in scope.products. Now, this is important because your view, your template, will be able to display, to represent whatever is in the scope. Okay? So essentially, to prepare the view, you put the things that you need to display in scope. That's really how it works. Okay? So now the scope knows about products. And notice also that it has a do refresh method. And that's a nice feature of Ionic that automatically gives you the pull to refresh in a list, which, again, is one of the patterns that I was talking about before that people expect in a mobile app. Now, if you have tried yourself to implement pull to refresh programmatically yourself, it's not that easy. It's kind of tricky, but that is something that you get for free automatically with Ionic, with the Ionic framework. So, okay, so remember, we looked at the controller, but now, how is that thing going to be displayed? It's going to be displayed by product list. So let's take a look at product list, okay? So this is product list. You see that it has some custom HTML directives. A view, Ion view is an Ionic view, Ion nav. These are all components in the Ionic framework. But what's really interesting here is this. See, I'm using an ng repeat here, so this is essentially a loop, and I'm looping through what? I'm looping through products. Now, how does it know about products? How does it know about product? Because I put it in scope, okay? So it knows about product because we stored it in the scope, in the local scope for that state, so I can represent it in my view. So you see how nicely organized things become when you use that, you know, these simple conventions. Okay? And so I loop through that, and then it's going to give me a product for each, you know, item in the array if you want, and then you can display product name, product description using that convention of the double curly. So we have a few minutes to kind of look at the server side of things. So for instance, I'm going to look at the products endpoint. And you see that it's fairly simple in Node.js to actually expose REST services. So this is the product module at the server side. And when you access /products, it's going to execute this method here. The interesting thing, as I mentioned before, is that this is not SOCL. This is really SQL against your local Postgres database. And you don't have to worry about synchronization of data between, you know, Postgres and your Salesforce instance, because Heroku Connect is going to do that for you automatically. So now let me quickly show you a couple of things that are maybe a little less trivial, and you know, and different ways to engage and which APIs to use. I think we covered Salesforce, Force.com. We covered Heroku quite well with Heroku Connect. I wanted to spend a minute on ExactTarget and how do we actually use the ExactTarget APIs, for instance, to push campaigns to users. So you see that here, this is the app.js file, and this is really the kind of the way you bootstrap an application. So ExactTarget comes with an API that I'm using here. As soon as we load the application, I'm going to say, hey, look, I want to register for real-time notifications, right? So if my friend shares something on Facebook, I want to know about it. Or if the marketing manager decides that, you know, it's important to provide me with information, I want to know about that too. So you see that I register for notification, and I specify an event handler that's going to be called when a message is pushed to my device. Now, you may wonder why that event handler is provided as a string as opposed to a real function. Any idea for that? Why do I provide the event handler as a string and not as a function, as a reference to a function? And I know it's getting late. You don't know what to do for dinner tonight. So for the good answer, I have a burrito cart for you. Just across the street, Chipotle, it's good, come on. Why? Why do you provide the event handler as a string? Now you're motivated. What is it? What's the answer? It's not a function on the server. Minification issue? Yeah. Nice try, nice try. Can I really provide a reference to when am I going to get that notification? Of course, if the application is open, right? But also, you have an answer there. I'm going to give it to you. I'm going to give you a burrito card. All right, so the answer is, it's kind of like a promise. Yes, here you go. Remember, with real-time notification, you may get that message even if the application is not running. Okay, that's how push notification works. Sometimes you get Facebook notification, but you don't have Facebook open, but you still get the message, right? So we couldn't pass a reference to a live function or a live reference to a function if you want, because what if the application is not running? Well, obviously that reference doesn't exist. So you provide it as a string so that the OS, when it's going to call your application, knows, okay, now that I instantiate, because at that point the OS is going to start your app, is going to say, okay, now that I instantiated everything, I will look for a method called onNotification, and I will invoke that. In other words, at that point, there is no live reference to a function, because that function doesn't exist if the application is not running, obviously. Okay? So that was just a little piece of trivia to keep you awake, but the point is, you see that the APIs to actually interact with ExactTarget and get push notification, it's actually not that difficult. And it adds a lot of value. It really helps you engage with your customer in a different way, because if you never wake your customer up and remind your customer that you exist, you know, oftentimes the application sits there and is not used. So it's really good to have yet another channel of interaction. And that's all the time we have. I know that there are other exciting sessions, so thank you so much for coming. Thanks a lot. And if you have questions, since we went a little over, I'm going to stick around here, and feel free to come over, and I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you.